My name is Ruth, I am 72 years old, and I once believed the greatest betrayal a mother could ever feel would come from strangers, never from the one child I raised with my own hands. I spent my life building a small but comfortable legacy, a modest house, a tidy savings account, and a reputation in town for kindness. My daughter Laura was the center of that life, bright, pushy, and always saying she would look after me in my old age. But on the coldest night of my life, the person I trusted most betrayed me in the cruelest imaginable way. What happened that night is the reason I am telling you this now, because I heard every word she said while she thought I was slipping into forever. You will never believe how close I came to being buried alive, and how that very near death changed everything. Read on if you think you can handle the truth. It began with a glass of tea. Laura had come by that evening, smiling that practiced smile, claiming she'd brought something to cheer me up. I remember the warmth of the cup against my palm, the steam rising like a gentle promise. We chatted about small things, neighbors, the garden, the radio, until slowly my eyelids grew heavy as if someone had pulled a soft curtain across my eyes. I blamed the long day, the ache in my bones. I told Laura I might rest in the lounge chair for a moment. She bent down, kissed my forehead, and told me to sleep. I thought nothing of it. But when I woke, the world had changed. The air was thin, the light gone. My throat tasted like metal. I tried to sit up and the world tilted. My joints felt leaden and my ears rang with a distant echo. Something was wrong. How could I be so cunningly drugged by the one I trusted? The next sounds I remember were muffled. The scrape of wood, a dull thunk, the heavy thud of a lid being closed. Panic hit like an electric current. I realized, with a cold clarity that made my breath stutter, that I was being put in a coffin. The lid descended inches from my face, the smell of lacquer and old wood filling my nose. I pounded and screamed until my voice broke into weak gasps, screams that were swallowed by the hushed conspiratorial voices outside. Laura's voice was there, clinical and calm, as if discussing a business transaction rather than the life of her mother. She said words I never expected to hear in that tone. "It'll be easy. We'll get everything." My heart hammered. How had love turned to ledger? How had my life been reduced to a balance sheet? If anyone had walked in that moment, they would have heard only silence, and yet my ears had never been clearer. What would I do now that I knew her plan? As the coffin lid closed and the darkness thickened, my mind raced. For a while I believed I was dying, that the world would extinguish like a blown-out candle. But as breath slowed and lashes rested on my cheeks, something stubborn inside refused to surrender. I remembered my father, who had taught me to never give up on the last breath, and I whispered tiny prayers and old names as if the words themselves might open a door. Then I heard the most damning sound of all. Laura on the phone, laughing, talking about buyers and signatures, about seizing deeds and cashing out accounts. She said aloud things she would never say to my face. How she'd tell people I'd passed quietly, how she'd stage the funeral, how no one would suspect her. Each sentence landed on my ears like a hammer against a glass heart. I had to hold on to make a plan from panic. But how do you form a plan when you can barely move and the world has chosen your coffin as its next beehive? Could I possibly turn this darkness into my advantage? I lay there listening until the voices faded and the house grew still. The weight of the wood pressed against my chest, but so did another weight: knowledge. I had the names, the dates, the entire scheme, because Laura had imagined my silence and therefore felt free to speak. It was a wicked, awful irony. By trying to silence me forever, she left me with a single weapon she could not take away: my ears. But as the shivers of cold crept closer and the air grew each minute thinner, the question burned sharp and urgent. Would I survive long enough to use what I'd heard? My lungs were dwindling, and the house above me hummed with life and greed. The last thing I felt before a thin blackness edged my vision was a stubborn ember of thought. If I escape, everything will change. Because this is where the past you never heard about shows how everything came to this terrible night. How a daughter learned to put profit before the person who gave her life. My name is Ruth, I am 72 years old, and before I nearly died in a coffin I had a life full of ordinary struggle and quiet pride. I was born into an immigrant family that taught me the value of steady work and honest living. I married young, raised a daughter, and when my husband died, I carried the household and our little shop single-handedly. Laura grew up under that roof, headstrong, bright, gifted at negotiation, and always impatient for the next step. I taught her how to balance books, to be sensible, and to never gamble on chance. She watched me with a fierce focus that sometimes made me proud and sometimes made me uneasy. You might want to know how a child of mine, schooled in my lessons of thrift and kindness, turned into the woman who would nail me into a coffin. The truth lives in small moments you think are nothing until they aren't. Laura was brilliant at spotting opportunity. As a teenager, she sold trinkets at the school fair and returned with more than most: money, friends, a hunger for status. She wanted more than our small life. When she won a scholarship to a college far away, I rejoiced. When she returned with worldly airs and a taste for better things, I listened and encouraged her, thinking exposure would broaden her mind toward kindness. But something else set in. She started keeping her own secrets. Late-night calls she took outside on the porch, unexplained small purchases, and the way she watched me count the day's receipts with a cold impatience I didn't understand. I chalked it up to the ambition that had driven her to make her life different from mine. But ambition is a thin crust. Beneath it can lie hunger that eats the heart. Do you recognize how small things can foreshadow ruin? Over the years, Laura's ambitions ballooned into expectation. She believed my savings were a cushion she deserved. When she was unemployed for a stretch, she asked for loans. I lent what I could, believing in her capacity to rebound. I kept thinking, this is a phase, she'll recover. I didn't see how those debts and refusals hardened into a sense of entitlement. It started with requests, then demands, then explosions of blame whenever I hesitated. Live-in help, then loans, then arguments that ended with slammed doors. My friends advised caution. She's your daughter, Ruth, but your money is your future. I didn't listen enough. Mothers are famously terrible with boundaries when it comes to their children. You'll see how my mercy became the hinge upon which betrayal swung. Could I have restrained it if I'd known the shape of her hunger? When the business grew and I finally sold a portion of the property to ease my burdens, I felt relief and a small joy that I could now enjoy quiet evenings rather than worrying over ledgers. I confided in Laura in a way mothers do. Quietly, warmly, with the odd pride of seeing your child partake of the fruits of your labor. She listened, too close to eager, asking questions about accounts and transfers that seemed practical, until one day I discovered a line item missing, a withdrawal unaccounted for. Confrontation followed. She protested innocence, then anger, then avoidance. She cried and promised to make it right, and I, foolishly believing in the child I raised, let her. That single decision cost me more than money. It cost me perspective. Would the signs have been different if I'd set firmer limits? I will never know, but I wish I had listened to the small voices of caution that now haunt me. Weeks before the coffin night, Laura's conversations changed tone. They were less about opportunity and more about timing, about how some families liquidated assets and handled elders in quiet ways that spared public scandal. I heard phrases through doors because she forgot the privacy of adults. "We can stage it as natural," she said once. "Who will suspect a peaceful passing?" Deeds and accounts get retitled quickly. The words lodged like splinters in my mind, but I hoped, desperately, that I was mishearing or that a youthful cynicism had taken a dangerous turn. However, the pattern of secrecy and the repeated disappearances of small items told me a different story. The child I raised was preparing to convert my life into currency. The horror of that idea steeled me, but not enough to stop what came next. My name is Ruth, I am 72, and the coffin night came after a series of small betrayals that no one saw as a pattern until it was too late. The execution of the plan was deceptively simple because it relied on two things: my trust and the secrecy that comes with family. Laura's skill was in making normal acts look ordinary. Pouring tea, tucking in a blanket, as she slipped a sedative into my cup and then watched me falter with a compassion that was staged. The first wave of nausea blurred edges, then heaviness. It was like sinking into a cloud, and part of me welcomed rest because the fear made calm impossible. But when hands moved to close the lid above me, I realized the cloud was quicksand. Have you ever felt a normal evening turn into the hinge of your life? I had never thought it possible until that lid slotted into place. While the wood pressed my palms and the darkness pooled, I kept my mind as clear as I could. Laura's hubris was her undoing. She believed that silence and speed would protect her. She made the colossal error of talking freely in that ease, naming the buyers, timing the legal changes, boasting that it would be a clean exit plan. I learned names spoken as tribute to greed, dates and figures like liturgy. I learned of a man who'd promised fast cash in exchange for an arranged, quiet passing. I learned that the plan hinged on the belief that a death would be accepted without question. Each fact hardened into a map I could use if I could survive the cold. What would you do if the people you loved negotiated your life as if it were a commodity? I clung to the notion that the more they planned, the more angles they exposed. Angles someone could exploit if they were paying attention. As hypothermia crept in and consciousness slipped like a tired thread, I listened for the rhythm of the house. I heard door hinges and the soft clink of envelopes, but also a faint cough and the tick of an old clock that had always kept my days. The sounds became my lifeline. I had to slow my breath, to keep the panicked motor of fear from using the last oxygen. I noticed the lid's lip was not sealed uniformly. An old screw had rusted through the hinge in a place where Laura's hurried hands hadn't checked. The very flaw that had made the coffin safe in its prime, antique construction, would become the knife that opened it. I formed a plan so small it felt ridiculous. Breathe when you can, conserve movement, wait for the house to shift, use the failed hinge. It took deliberation and a sliver of luck, but as the hours crawled, luck, thin and unpredictable, chose me. How? When the turning point arrives and the liar's arrogance becomes the mother's salvation. My name is Ruth, I am 72, and the moment of reversal was not cinematic. It was small, stubborn, and utterly human. The cooler temperature had numbed my fingers until they were clumsy, but sheer will moved them enough to feel the rough wood along the coffin's rim. With a whisper of movement I tested the old hinge, aligning the screw head with my thumb and twisting against the grain until the rust gave a sigh and slipped. An old woodworker's trick my father had taught me long ago. The lid groaned like a thing waking, an old hinge protesting the world of air again. When the crack of light cut into the darkness, I had to pause and listen. Outside, voices were closer than I hoped. Laura laughed, triumphant. "We'll be gone by morning," she told the other woman, and I felt nausea and rage like a tide. How dare she parcel out my final hours like a ledger entry? I used the light sliver to prop the lid and pushed upward with my knees until the coffin gave way enough for me to pull myself half out. I clawed at the inside, braced my arms on the rim, and hauled my slow, aching body upward. The air hit me like a shock. Could I actually be alive? I staggered out and found the kitchen in the messy midst of departure. Strewn documents, open drawers, the smell of strong coffee and the metallic tang of worry. Laura and her accomplice moved with the mechanical efficiency of people who had rehearsed both loss and gain. Their backs were turned as I crept behind a pantry door, making no sound. I watched them divide envelopes, transfer keys, and act like undertakers of their own conscience. This was the moment of moral accounting. Do I confront them here, weak and near collapse, or do I gather proof and expose them to the world? My body remembered the many times I had advised Laura on contracts, on not signing things in haste. Now those lessons flipped into weapons. Emails on the screen, a bank statement in an open file, a recorded phone message I could retrieve from the answering machine in the hall. The living room, my living room, had become evidence. Would I fall into their trap again by letting emotion rule? I chose proof over immediate vengeance. I would gather evidence, call a neighbor I trusted, and then confront the thieves with law and light. Can you feel how fragile the victory seemed? My name is Ruth, I am 72, and the final act of this story is the slow and satisfying unspooling of truth. After I escaped and hid until the car pulled out of the drive, I fumbled to the phone and dialed Eleanor next door, a woman of steady nerves and a habit of noticing things. "Eleanor," I whispered, "I need you to come now." She arrived in her slippers, eyes wide, and the two of us moved with deliberate caution through the house. I collected the bank statements Laura had left face up, the signed affidavit on the desk, and a series of emails on Laura's laptop that spelled out the deal in black and white. I even found a recorded snippet on the answering machine where Laura had practiced her condolence script. And there it was, the plan etched in her own words. The proof was a curse and a deliverance. How do you feel when the very instruments of betrayal become the instruments of accountability? We called the police and the lawyer, and then, the part that I had rehearsed in quiet nights, we arranged a quiet reveal. Laura returned later that day after errands, bragging about how smooth the morning had gone. She found the house full of lights and neighbors and officers in plain clothes. The shock on her face was not theatrical. It was human and deflatingly small. Eleanor read the list of accounts and transfers as if she were reading from a ledger of sin. The officers took her statements, her supplies, and the copies of the documents I had gathered. Laura tried to flee, but the road was blocked by the neighbors who had known us for years, people who had suspected but never wanted to pry. Their faces were not triumphant. They were sorrowful and resolute. In the end, Laura was arrested for fraud, for intent to defraud an elder, for tampering with property, and a slew of charges that reduce even the boldest plans to paper shreds. What was most grievous was not the handcuffs but the loss of the daughter I'd once held on my lap. Could the law mend that breach? No. But it could stop her from harming me and from claiming the life I had earned. Years later, when the bruises had faded and the legal work had done what legal work can do, I sat in my kitchen with Eleanor and the neighbors at a small table. We had tea that tasted like quiet victory, and as I looked at the faces around me, some of whom had once been friends of my child, I felt a complicated peace. I had died a little in that coffin, the woman who believed infinite trust in family, but in reclaiming my life and exposing the truth I had also been born again in a different way. Not resurrected by supernatural force, but resurrected by the hard work of justice and community. The lesson I learned and want to leave you with is this: love can blind, but courage and evidence can unbind. Protect yourself with boundaries and keep your life's paperwork in order. If a quiet voice inside you warns of danger, listen. And if you survive a betrayal, use what you know to hold the betrayer accountable, not for revenge alone, but to make sure no one else is hurt the way you were. If this story moved you, share it, like and subscribe to this channel. Talk about elder rights, about warning signs, about how communities can protect their most vulnerable. And if you or someone you love needs help right now, contact local authorities or elder care services. Safety is not shameful, and justice starts with a call.